Hello everyone, welcome to week 9 in our lecture series for EDUC2065, Professionalism, Leadership and Management in Early Childhood. In today's lecture, we'll just go over some last minute reminders for assignment 3 for those of you that are already underway with that or might be finalising some of your details. We're going to then have a look at a couple of recent cases, recent in the past couple of years, that have involved schools or childcare centres or childcare workers, and just see what the outcomes and the implications for early childhood educators are from those cases. And then the content of today's lecture is about the role of teamwork and how communication plays into teamwork, effective teamwork, a little bit of a look at change management, and then at the end of this lecture we've got an interactive quiz. So make sure you've got a notebook handy or something where you can jot down a few answers as we go. Okay, so I'm just going to talk briefly now about assignment 3, which is an essay or a report, and I'll talk about the difference and your options there for formatting in this week's tutorial. And it is as a result of an interview with an educational or pedagogical leader. It is due at the end of week 12, so make sure that you've made a plan to have that done by that due date. If you do end up requiring an extension, please note that you do have to go through the process and get it approved by Tracy Treasure, not by me. Please don't email me asking for an extension. That's not something within my capacity to grant you. But I will again talk about the process for obtaining an extension if you need it in tutorial. If you have not yet scheduled and got a plan or a date to conduct an interview with a pedagogical leader, you need to get onto that very quickly. Most of you, I think, by now have at least booked it, whether or not it's been conducted by this point. It doesn't have to be very long. I would imagine 30 minutes would be plenty of time. And again, hopefully you've been able to identify someone or spoken to me about any issues that you may have had being able to actually get in contact with somebody to do this interview. The whole purpose of this particular assignment is to encourage you to become really familiar with current issues and a little bit more deeper dive into the research in early childhood management and leadership, and to look at the various different roles in early childhood education and care, specifically this role of pedagogical leader. So you will need to ask yourself this question first, and this needs to be in your essay. What is pedagogy? Okay, so you need to know that pedagogical or educational leadership implies that the leader has to understand pedagogy. So you need to show me that you understand pedagogy as part of this assignment. We know that pedagogy is the art or the style of teaching, and it's also the process of leading a child to learning. And so there is a science behind it, but also an art behind it, in other words, a skill set. So where would you find information about early childhood pedagogy? So this is where we head to the EYLF, because it describes early childhood pedagogy, which are those principles and practices. And it also gives us outcomes that are required to support and enhance the learning of young children. So if you complete this assignment and you have not referenced the EYLF, there's going to be some significant concern on my part when I'm marking it. So please make sure I can easily see through your referencing in text and end text that you have delved deeply into the pedagogical explanations that are outlined in that document. You will also need to describe what is the work of an educational leader. In other words, what do they do? And this might form part of the questions that you ask them in the interview. You will need to support your explanation, obviously, with reference to the EYLF. You may also need to reference the National Quality Standards. That would be something I would expect to see. And I encourage all of you to go and look at the Code of Ethics from Early Childhood Australia, which is a very short document, it's just a brochure, but certainly there are stakeholders and parties represented there that will certainly come up if there are any ethical decision-making processes that your pedagogical leader has to make. The steps and the processes that are informed by research and principles of best practice include things like you need to be able to talk about how do educational leaders apply appropriate and workable leadership and management strategies. So examples are good, and this is where the interview can help you. So you might explain something, you will justify it with research, but you then might have a for example to illustrate that particular point. Throughout that process, some of those leadership styles that we explored, so think autocratic, consultative, participative, and laissez-faire, some of those styles may start to come through or be influenced in how the organisation considers who controls the power and authority to make these decisions. Now, your educational leader may not necessarily know those particular categories of leadership. It's not important that they do, but you do. So when you are examining and reporting in your assignment, you may be able to reference some of those. So you will need to go and find some research to back up those particular leadership styles. So some of your references will also be leadership specific focused as well as early childhood. We know that leaders are there to promote change. So think of a question or look at your answers from your interview. Is there something that you can speak to that's about change management or having a vision for improvement? Leaders take on initiatives, they do take on challenges, and certainly they are a team of people that push best practice onto others. So leaders also have to represent what the organisation stands for. And a leader refers to obviously that suitably qualified and experienced educator or coordinator who leads the development of a program, think curriculum program, and is a role model for other educators in the service. Now, I do recommend an essay format. You do not need to spend a very long time on introductions and conclusions. You can go straight into addressing that first dot point there, which is, explaining and defining pedagogical leadership and pedagogy. I'm going to talk and answer any questions for you in tutorial. So have a think about where you're at in terms of planning this assignment and bring any questions that you have to tutorial and we'll get those clarified for you. The readings that we have covered so far in this course that are on Blackboard are a great source for referencing for this particular assignment. However, I encourage you to explore some wider reading. The length is obviously 1,500 to 1,800 words. There's a range there. Now, this is not a huge assignment. This is not a 2,200, 2,500 word assignment. So you will have to be quite concise. And as I mentioned before, you may need to make a plan to make sure that you are successful by the end of week 12. Finally, don't snooze on those Kian's textbooks. There's 2 textbooks that you can consider. They are again in the readings, they are the recommended readings for this course. And again, I would expect to see them in your reference list, as well as possibly citations maybe from the national law or regulations that are specific to educational leadership. All right, I look forward to your questions and we will unpack formatting in more detail for you at the upcoming tutorial.
Before we go on, it's really important to remember that when we're coming to do assignment 3, the task is to write about the role of an educational leader. There are a variety of managerial tasks that do need to happen at a well-functioning childcare centre, but some of these fall under the role of director or manager rather than the role of educational leader. So be mindful not to write about the types of things that you can see on the screen here in your assignment, because these are more of a managerial nature. Things like ensuring everyone's complying with laws and regulations, meeting their duty of care and staffing ratios and health safety policies and procedures, ensuring staff have their relevant qualifications and first aid training, making sure a qualified early childhood teacher is at the centre. All of those types of things still need to happen, but they're not part of this assignment as the role of an educational leader. They are managerial in nature. Some further examples of some managerial tasks include making sure there are staff rosters and supervision plans, reporting to parents about rest times, eating times, illnesses, and all that record keeping processes that need to happen, evaluating the childcare environment and setting it up and packing it down, planning children's learning experiences, and just the day-to-day operations of a centre. Still necessary, as I said, for the correct functioning of a centre, but these are separate duties from the topic of assignment 3, which is about the role of educational leader, which is much more curriculum focused and leadership focused.
Before we transition on to the section of today's lecture about teamwork, I just wanted to bring to your attention some of the current investigations and subsequent penalties that ECRU has been undertaking just in this year alone, even from January to April where we currently stand. Have a little look through some of the titles there. You'll see that some of them are incidents that are still being investigated, and some of them have resulted in particular penalties as a result of those investigations at an ECRU level. So I guess one of the important factors for us to consider as workers in early childhood and understanding the sorts of safety measures, particularly that you can sort of see coming through there, we do need to have a very clear knowledge of all emergency procedures. And we need to know, how do we safely conduct lockdowns? Who is calling the police in the event that the police are needed? How do we isolate students or very young children very safely? We also need to report any observable maintenance concerns to our managers or directors. We need to document or have some process or protocol for documenting these reports onto a maintenance register so that they can be addressed in a timely fashion. Some of them will need to be addressed immediately to avoid any harm. Others may, sort of be in the next visit that, let's say, the maintenance person has reoccurring visits. It's important to make note of any efforts that you take to avoid or minimize harm to children that are related to any broken or old or hazardous conditions. So I know sometimes documentation can be burdensome, but there should hopefully be checklists or ways of streamlining that process so that there is a record of aspects that have been reported for action. We need to know our mandatory reporting obligations, and there is specific mandatory reporting training that childcare workers and teachers receive as a condition of their employment, but also registration. If you see something, say something. Okay, so sometimes that's just a good little tagline to think about. If you notice something, try not to get just too busy to be able to say something about it. It may not be you that has to fix the issue, but if you've noticed the issue, it is your responsibility to report that issue or notify somebody who can actually take action to rectify that issue. And just as a final reminder, our obligation is to the child. Our obligation is not primarily to the parent, it's not primarily to the co-workers, and it is not primarily to our employers. Our primary obligation is to the children. So we do need to make sure that when we are conducting ourselves and perhaps noticing things, that we need to make our decisions based upon what is best for the child or children, not to let other concerns, which will sometimes be applicable, to get in the way of what our next step may be.
Okay, so one of the main topics for today's lecture is the reality that when we are employed at a childcare centre or as a school, we are a team member. And so we need to know, how do we work effectively as an individual, but also as a collaborator with other people, because it is an essential part of how we operate as an effective educator. Most childcare services consist of small, medium or large teams of people with different training, different skills and expertise, and they've got to be able to work together in a way that enables the service to achieve its goals. For an organisation to run smoothly, all team members must have a clear understanding of their role, of their duties and responsibilities, as well as those of other team members. There are a basic framework for organisational structures, and these include rules and policies specific to the organisation. The structure determines the order of authority, and it explains the rights and duties of those employed. And through the structure, it's understood what the different levels of management will be, what roles will be filled, what responsibilities are expected within each role, kind of like role descriptions. Ultimately, what decides each of these elements is the main objective that the organisation would like to accomplish and the plan that they choose to meet their goals. So think about what might happen in a childcare where each team member had no real understanding of the roles and responsibilities of other team members. It's essential to have a clear sense of purpose, working towards a similar goal. The roles that individuals play within a setting, so beyond just your job description, the importance of each of these roles, the interdependence of each role upon another's. Valuing each other's contributions and roles and valuing each other's knowledge of each child and sharing insights and perspectives with one another is a really important factor. So we start to think about our communication skills as well as our ability to work with other people. Having the same goal or having similar goals really clearly communicated across the team means that we all understand what we're here doing. We all know why we're here, we're all working towards these same goals. So some of these goals might be, what are the daily duties for caring for the children? How do we initiate play? How do we maintain a clean environment? How do we maintain supervision? What are our goals, such as contributing to the program? Who can bring ideas to this program? How do we seek additional training so that we can keep up to date with current childcare practices? How do we maintain appropriate records? How do we formulate positive working relationships? And how do we contribute to the development of the organisation's policies, procedures, and practices? So all of these different factors need to be contributed to by the whole team. So as you will no doubt now be accustomed, we have our little black pause button. So the question that I would love for you to consider and hit pause and maybe reflect with some notes, so, handwrite some notes. What is your current definition of teamwork? So hit pause, jot down a couple of notes, maybe 2 or 3 dot points, and then resume when you're ready. Okay, so somewhere along there, I'm assuming that some of your responses may have included things like opportunities for all to contribute, sharing the load or sharing a vision in an effort to reach a goal, and having respect for different viewpoints. You might have had additional definitions, but hopefully that's the main vein. Many people will be familiar with the old sort of cliche that there's no I in team, and this reminds us all of the importance of working together and how we share responsibilities and maintain a balance of the different roles within a team. Despite this, though, every team does in fact begin with I, because it begins with the individuals, who come together to form the team, and without whom the team cannot exist. So does it mean that all team members share all tasks equally? Not always. And why is that and why isn't that? Some teams will play to particular people's strengths or expertise. Some people will distribute different tasks equally, or there'll be a rostered system, depending on the scope of work and depending upon how the rules and policies of that place operate. One other question to consider is it fair to expect unqualified staff to plan for the developmental needs of the children? Because there will be unqualified staff or those working towards a qualification in a childcare centre. Have a think about what your opinion is on whether or not it is fair to expect unqualified staff to assist with carrying the load of planning for children. Come ready with a response to that one to the tutorials tomorrow. You yourselves as students have previously worked as members of a team. Sometimes you might do this in group presentations. You may have done this in a previous job that you've had before. Throughout the program that you're currently enrolled in, you will have discussed teamwork and group work. You will have worked collaboratively on numerous occasions, and you'll have certain opinions and feelings about how you approach that task. There are a specific set of skills and knowledge that's required for success in teamwork. So there are certain personal attributes that we have that we can exercise to ensure that our contributions are effectively carried out when we work together. So think about how you might then do this with students. So having really good interpersonal skills is just essential. Your emotional intelligence, your listening capacity, your communication capacity, and those skills, and how do you inspire confidence are all ways that we can ensure that children are part of a team. How do you demonstrate respectful relationships? If you establish effective professional relationships, then this will smooth your path to career success. The confidence and skills you have to communicate with everyone effectively and respectfully, so being open and honest, and making sure that you do speak up when you need to, but in a respectful way, can also, again, put you on the path to career success. You will need respect. You will need to be assisting, and you will need to cooperate with your colleagues. All carers, all directors, all teachers, childcare staff, school staff, there's always an expectation of respectful cooperation. You also need to have an element of trust and collegiality. So you can't go into these types of roles for yourself. You need to go in understanding that you're a member of a team. And if you operate in such a way that serves yourself at the expense of others, very quickly other people will pick up on that, and then you will find yourself in an awkward situation that will not be child focused. So make sure you give yourself time to grow as an educator and understand from the outset it's not just you. There are others around that you will need to work with, and it actually can become much more achievable if we do work well with others. There are a lot of benefits to approaching work this way when we're looking at caring for children and educating children. We develop time for reflection and we develop our skills. We can also recognise that there's no one right approach and no one right answer. And for some people, this can be really challenging. My experience as an assistant principal working with teachers, we often go in with strong opinions based upon our own experiences, and something that may have worked or may not have worked in the past really does inform our current decision making. So sometimes we have to unlearn previous experiences, and we might always be in trial phases of trying different things to see if we can get the results that we want. We need to have courage. Sometimes we have to question those taken for granted practices and assumptions. In a previous role, I used to be responsible for some change management, and one of the phrases I would hear from staff is, "But we've always done it that way." And there was a little bit of a sentiment that that was not a good thing to say. And I understand that, because if we've always done something a particular way, that can stagnate and it can keep you locked in a certain way and lock you out of innovation. However, on the flip side of that, there might be some valid reasons for why a particular process has been done that way. So together as a staff, you might need to unpack, okay, well, what are the good parts of how we've always done it? What don't we want to lose? And where are we missing opportunities to innovate or to increase value for children? It does take a certain amount of time and energy. You need to commit time, you need to commit energy to be an effective member of a team. And one of the hardest and best roles you can play as an educator is you need to be open to giving and open to receiving critical feedback. And this can be really challenging because it can be quite confronting. And it is something that can be learnt. So if you are not great at it, it's okay. There is a journey ahead of you. If you can receive feedback, and you get a little bit of this on your pracs and it will continue into your careers, but if you can action feedback and take your lessons and be verbose about your lessons, so talk about your learning, the things you tried and worked, the things you tried and didn't work, how you made changes based on feedback and what the results of that was. If you can tell those stories, you're setting yourself up for some really good leadership models, because part of leadership sometimes is vulnerability. On a team and as educators, we need to be very mindful of our time management. We need to value everybody's time. We also need to value our own time, and we make daily decisions based upon that time commitment and that energy commitment that we've spoken about. We need to value every individual team member, and we need to let them know that we value them. So if you think of all the ways in which you motivate children and how you show them that they are valued, and you can apply some of those techniques to adult team members. That can just simply be a quiet word of thanks. It might be a shared smile at a challenging overcome, when we've overcome a challenge together. It might be remembering something that other people might consider trivial, but which you suspect is quite important to that particular individual. All those tiny little things matter. And over time, small acts of trust can end up building a really strong relationship amongst your team. The Early Childhood Code of Ethics has also got some very clearly outlined ways that you can conduct yourself in an ethical manner, all of which, again, build trust. Some of the benefits of these include supporting each other, acknowledging our personal strengths, and acknowledging our perhaps personal or professional weaknesses and where we might need support, How do we learn from each other? In other words, how do we listen to one another when we're sharing our experiences or our learnings? Recognizing that each person has to contribute their particular skills and knowledge, that they might have different viewpoints. But the sum of the whole is greater than its parts. We can achieve more collectively than any individual person can do by themselves. So in an effective team, individuals will find their jobs enjoyable and rewarding. They'll cooperate well. They'll be keen to accept responsibility. They'll work hard and they'll work to a high standard. They'll complete projects on time, and they'll rarely be absent from work. Absenteeism is tied to a variety of different reasons, but one of them is a failure of effective teamwork. So keep in mind there are an incredible amount of professional benefits to a high-performing team, and there's a lot of body of research out there about how high-performing teams operate, things they do, things they avoid. Evaluate your own current role in a team that you might already be a part of, and maybe bring some of those thoughts and ideas to our tutorial. All individuals have varied skills and knowledge that they use as part of a team. However, people also learn additional skills and knowledge from those around them. This can tie into Vygotsky's theory of social constructivism. So by observing the practices of your co-workers and asking questions, you can increase your skills and knowledge in many areas. This social learning takes place as a group of people share common goals. So think about how this might apply to scaffolding tasks with children, but also scaffolding tasks with staff at staff meetings and just in our general conversations. The educational leader helps others to reflect on their own practice, look at what's going well, celebrate it, and look at what changes they could make to maximise learning in perhaps spaces where opportunity exists. This type of professional reflection and change requires leadership. So the educational leader might involve them prompting colleagues to read certain sections of the EYLF. You might help them interpret what it means. What does this particular practice mean? Let's unpack that together. How do you encourage conversations about high quality practice? How do you ensure that all are involved in the decisions about changes that affect them? Leaders are going to support and guide colleagues through these processes of inquiry and reflection. If you are personally non-threatening and people feel comfortable, they'll share their work and they'll gradually become more willing to try new strategies and reflect on how they went. And this speaks to that trust building and those little small incidents where we sort of put a little bit of money into the trust bank with our relationships, those smiles, those nods, those side conversations, those comments of appreciation, that all goes some way to having people feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable in front of you in terms of their professional growth. The early years learning framework identifies that this process of critical reflection and ongoing professional learning is one of the 8 principles that underpin effective early childhood pedagogy. So without that relationship, without critical reflection, we are not actually operating at the standard of growth that we need to be able to meet high quality pedagogical outcomes. The goal is obviously that the person who's being taught will end up being more skilled or knowing more, and that they'll then be able to use that knowledge for themselves. So it goes back to that saying, if we know better, we do better. Other ways we can support team members include looking at the early years framework, including collaborative leadership and teamwork as one of the new principles that underpins effective early childhood pedagogy. Critical reflection and ongoing professional learning means that we might need to pose as educational leaders some reflective questions to our staff. Things like, are we achieving or have we achieved our goals? How do we know that we've achieved them? What went well? And what were some barriers? What hampered us? Reflective practice involves engaging with questions. Sometimes it involves gathering information, critically examining what's happening, and then reflecting on what might potentially be changed. Educators are required to design and develop learning and teaching programs to suit the needs of the children in their care. And they must ensure that the programs include learning opportunities and enriching experiences for their children aimed at achieving the desired outcomes. The best way of developing a curriculum that meets the needs of the whole school community is to provide opportunities for teachers to work together at common times each week. Teachers need time and support to talk about teaching, to reflect, to observe one another's classrooms on a weekly, if not daily basis, if they're going to make lasting changes in their classroom practice. The notion of collaborative leadership and teamwork are built on a sense of shared responsibility and professional accountability for children's learning, development, and well-being. I know one of the ways we sort of treat that professional accountability for children's learning at the school that I most recently worked at was the understanding that every teacher is responsible for every child. It's not just the children who are in front of you for that day. So, for example, if I am a year 2 teacher, I am still responsible for the overall learning and care of a child who may be in year 5. In other words, it's kind of an all-in understanding. The 30 children in my class, there might be a higher level, obviously, of responsibility and immediate curriculum responsibility and care. But things like NAP plan results, things like behavioural discussions at staff meetings, I am still a contributor and carer and educator of all of the children within my school, not just the children within my class. So just having that sort of mindset around that professional accountability and taking ownership for children's successes and also gaps that children might be experiencing in their learning. So, take credit where credit is due, but take responsibility when action is needed. Principle 8 in the EYLF, Collaborative Leadership and Teamwork, states that it is a view of leadership that empowers all members of the team to use their professional knowledge and skills in ways that assist everyone to do the best they can for children, for families and colleagues in their own setting. So this is a goal of all centres and schools from birth to 8. Okay, a quick research question. What does the Early Childhood Australia Code of Ethics say about working with colleagues? I invite you now to hit pause, go and quickly have a look, jot down your notes, and then come back when you're ready. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you have found something along the veins of having respect for different viewpoints, that different colleagues will bring different ideas and they come from different perspectives, and we still need to approach those different perspectives with respect, and also providing opportunities for everybody to contribute. Sometimes that means scheduling multiple ways of actually communicating. So maybe the occasional staff meeting isn't cutting it. Maybe we need to have some sort of asynchronous digital way of communicating, so something people can do when they think of something rather than being physically in a space at a certain time. And also about how do we share the load. If we notice that there is inequity in terms of how we've distributed the load between workers, then we might need to have a look at how can we more efficiently and more fairly distribute workload amongst employees. Okay, so we move on now to the role of an educational leader and leadership in general in education. Frequently and often involves leading change and implementing change and promoting change. Change is not easy for lots of people, and there are people who will become very resistant to introduced changes in a childcare centre or in a school. So it often falls to the role of the leader or leaders to be able to either change hearts and minds or find ways to contribute everybody's opinions and continue that vein of teamwork, but to still be pursuing those change. Introducing change involves more than just the initial decision to do something different. Planning for introducing the change, communicating it to staff, and then managing the after effects all needs to be part of that process. So everyone has to understand the big picture. Everybody has to understand why this change is necessary. So sometimes data plays a really important role in persuading people that this is the current situation and perhaps we've got an opportunity here to grow if we put our efforts into changing this aspect of whatever it is we've identified. Despite the merits or advantages of a new idea, adopting it requires people to abandon the comforts of the status quo and embrace the unknown. This can be, as I mentioned before, quite confronting with people, and particular people will have certain biases towards or against change that it's important to recognise. Change is a word that has some negative connotations for a lot of people, in particular changes in the workplace. People resist change for a variety of reasons, and we're going to look at some of those in a moment. If we have a look at that quote there too, abandoning the comforts of the status quo and embracing the unknown, both of those things actually go against human nature. So it can be incredibly confronting for people when changes are introduced. And you need to understand that as a leader, because you'll often find yourself, just by position of being the person introducing the change, a target of some of those uncomfortable feelings. When people resist change, they're protecting or defending something that they value, and it seems to be threatened by the attempt at change. It's important to understand that, so it's not necessarily coming from a personal hatred of you, if they're making a comment or if they're very reluctant to adopt new strategies or new work directives and things like that. So understanding that change is hard, and expecting it to be a managed process, so that process of change management needs to be well planned, is an important leadership skill. I would love for you just to maybe reflect upon your own personal feelings about change and consider maybe a recent situation in which somebody else has made a decision that affected your behaviour. How did it make you feel? How does new changes, what's your initial thoughts and ideas, your reaction to when somebody introduces a new way of doing something, perhaps when you've had a reasonably comfortable way of doing it before? Just maybe reflect on your own approach to that. There are a variety of reasons why people resist change, and as leaders we have to deal with that resistance. You can see on the table there fear of the unknown, fear of a loss of security, fear of a loss of power, poor timing, lacking information, no real mandate to change, no reason to change. Having a lack of resources or being in a habit can sometimes manifest as people being unwilling to change, and so they might fight you on some of the initiatives that you're trying to introduce. So how do we actually address each of these aspects? Because some of them will come from valid reasons and some of them will be just reactions. How do we gain the support of our employees for even the most drastic restructures that sometimes need to occur in the workplace? If you think about your previous pracs, what challenges did you face? And what have you learnt from these experiences? Perhaps you heard your mentor commenting about certain changes that were happening in their schools, or to curriculum, or to legislations. To overcome resistance to change, we have to make sure that the following criteria are met. So there needs to be a benefit. Whatever it is that's changing, that change should have a clear relative advantage for those being asked to change. So it needs to be seen as being a better way. It also needs to be compatibility. The change should be as compatible as possible with the existing values and experiences of the people being asked to change. It needs to be reasonably uncomplicated. So the level of complexity should be no more complex than is necessary. It must be as easy as possible for people to understand and use. Triability. The change should be something that people can try on a step-by-step basis or on a trial basis even, and make small adjustments as things progress before they make larger adjustments. So how do we incrementalize change for people so it's not too much too soon? Education and communication are really important. How do we educate people about a change before it's implemented? So how do we talk to them about what's going to be happening and why it's going to be happening? And how do we help them understand the logical reasoning behind the change? So what's the case? What is this case for change? What's the why? Getting good participation and involvement is key. Allow people to help design and implement the change themselves where possible. So for example, get brainstorming of ideas, put together committees and task forces that involve everybody, let people take ownership of certain aspects of the change, let them tell their stories of their successes or their learnings from these trials with each other. Facilitation and support are important. We need to make sure we're providing help, emotional help, and actual physical material resource help for people who are having trouble adjusting to the change. So what is your security net, your safety net for people who are possibly flailing when they first begin to adopt these changes? Some people will need a higher degree of attention and support than others. Have a plan for negotiation and agreement. So this might offer some incentives for those people who are resisting change. One of the other ways of doing this is offering incentives for people at the beginning. So you might get some early adopters who might just run with the change. And sometimes if you can incentivize those people, they can be instrumental in helping support and convince those who might be wanting to see someone else succeed with it first before they want to try it themselves. So how do you actually negotiate that process? So perhaps it's a staggered introduction rather than everybody's doing this new thing all at once. Be mindful of manipulation and co-optation. There will be attempts for some people to influence others. This needs to be done in a transparent and respectful way. Also be mindful of explicit and implicit coercion techniques. In some workplaces, the use of authority to get people to accept change has been used, and in some places it's unavoidable. But it's often, it manifests in lots of resistance to change because people see it as just being imposed on them without having any say. So be mindful of any coercion techniques that may backfire or that might unravel some of the goodwill of people who would have had initially accepted the change. As a leader, you will find that people will be far more committed to change if they can see that their perceptions have been considered and that they have a sense of ownership over some of the ideas and the concepts related to the changes. They'll embrace the change with open arms if those things are upheld. Sometimes it can simply be a matter of poor timing. So perhaps your change management process and your consultative process was really well planned, but maybe there was an external factor that made the timing of your change management just not work. If you've got, a huge audit, or if you've got an emergency situation, or if there's other big things going on, or if there's someone who's going through some personal crises or something like that, then you might need to try again at another time. In my own experience as being a change agent, which I was in a couple of previous roles, I sort of approached this with a sort of relentless kindness. And what I mean by that is being kind to everybody who is possibly struggling with change, but being really determined and relentless in the pace. So sometimes I might have to slow the change down, but it's not stopping. So some steps are fast and big leaps of faith. Others are incremental changes that might take a little bit of time or give people a longer sort of scope to adopt the change, but there's still a due date. There's still a sort of, reflective point. There's still an expectation that the change is going to happen, but always with kindness. Often disagreements and differences of opinion can be really confronting for people. Some people really don't like conflict, which is understandable. And sometimes it's really important to acknowledge that disagreements and differences of opinion can be incredibly productive. It can also help see a new starting point for new ideas, or maybe the leader really needs to examine that, hang on, I really didn't consider X, Y, and Z, and my employee is telling me this, and I need to take that into account. So what my initial big plan was might still be going to the same location, but we're just going to take a different pathway to get there, and that's been informed by the employees of the centre or the employees of the school, because they do really have valuable opinions and perspectives. So don't go out there fighting, obviously, but if you have a difference of opinion, then that can be an incredibly productive space if you can learn to be a little bit comfortable with expressing yourself respectfully in that time. So just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean either point is invalid. It just means that it might need a little bit more skill and communication to work through. When you're on your pracs, observe how educators learn from one another. Look at how they solve problems and make decisions as a team. If you've noticed that there are people who disagree but they just simply don't speak up and then they will go and talk about it afterwards, that's a really ineffective way of making your voice heard. If you find people are argumentative for the sake of argument and they're not actually interested in anything that's not someone just capitulating to their point of view, again, that's not an effective way of operating as a team. And there are reasons why people fall into those sorts of patterns of communication. Avail yourself of all opportunities to learn from colleagues, because inevitably there will be a difference of opinion and there will be differences of expertise and lessons learned in previous experiences that people want to share that can inform how change is approached. Seek opportunities to observe and participate in meetings that are held. Always volunteer to go to those, and always attend any in-service training experiences, planning meetings, staff meetings, those types of things. Okay, so we're going to run through some steps that we should take when we are managing change. As I read through these, just maybe think about how they might match those leadership styles that we've discussed a few weeks ago, and see if you can potentially categorize them into autocratic, consultative, participative, or laissez-faire. And just to recap, autocratic, that's when you maintain full personal control over all decision-making responsibilities. Consultative is when you listen attentively to employee suggestions and comments, but then you also always make the final decision. Participative is that teamwork approach where employees are encouraged to participate in decision-making and problem-solving in a group setting. And the laissez-faire is when the leaders turn all decision-making responsibilities over to the employees. So just keep those in your mind as we go through this list. So as we're implementing change, a first step is to consult with all staff during those decision-making stages. So don't make too many decisions by yourself too early. Do it together. Number 2, discuss the reasons for the change. What's the why? What made this change be proposed? Number 3, ask for feedback on the proposed change. So get people heard, listen as a part of this process really actively, gather data if you need to, and make sure that you're evaluating the validity of everybody's feedback. Number 4, clarify everyone's role in the change process. Who's going to do what, and when are they going to do it, and how are they going to do it? Number 5, involve staff in the implementation strategy. So put that into practice. Number 6, develop a timeline on specific actions of implementation. So sometimes when you're planning it, you need to have sort of staggered due dates for certain aspects of whatever the bigger change is going to be. So by a certain date, this committee will have recommended this action. By this date, these classes will have trialled this. On this date, we will be providing feedback on this particular change, etc. Number 7, determine the priority of actions. So sometimes you need to work backwards from a goal. So this is our ultimate goal. What needs to happen just before that? Okay, what needs to happen just before that, etc. Number 8, provide adequate training on any new systems or procedures. In my experience, provide lots of training. And sometimes training needs to be done together. Sometimes training needs to be done online. Sometimes training needs to be done face-to-face. Sometimes it needs to be done one-on-one. So really get a clear picture of what your training needs are going to be. Assess who's going to need the most help, when and why. Number 9, review the progress of change. Okay, so you might need to include a certain amount of stop and looks. You might need to look around and go, okay, this is further ahead than I thought we would be in terms of this big change at this point in time. Or, okay, this is taking longer than I thought it was going to take. Do I need to reevaluate my goals and perhaps, create more time for some of those changes to be implemented? And number 10, always maintain open lines of communication. Having those little small meetings, going and talking to individuals and going, hey, how are we going with this one? Is everything okay? Anything I can do to help? Or is there any barriers that we need to remove to get to this next step, particularly if you notice that maybe someone's struggling with their little bit of change that they're trying to implement? How can I help? What can we do? that relentless kindness and determination towards the goal is a really good part of that process. All skills with which leaders need to have. Okay, so to summarise this section on change management, we need to understand that change is hard for people. Refusing, though, to change is refusing to grow, develop, or advance, and choosing instead to stagnate. Change is a necessary part of our ever-evolving world, and change agents have the vision to see the need for change and sound the alarm before it's too late. People approach change with an inherent bias, and it's important as leaders we understand our own personal bias when we are approaching change. My experience as a leader, I had to recognise that I have a particular bias towards change. If you give me two different situations where one is to maintain the status quo, even if it's working, and one is to make a change to see if it's going to work in a better way or the same, I will inherently want to change. So I need to recognise that in myself as a leader and make sure that when I'm planning change management processes, I'm doing it in a very collaborative way and taking on other people's contributions and collaborations, because some of the cautions that they will raise I might not have given enough consideration to because I have an inherent bias towards change. Other people will be the complete opposite. And so it's important that as leaders, we understand that if we want to lead a high quality centre or a high quality educational environment like a school, high quality stems from motivation within a centre to raise standards above the minimum and to engage in activities that promote continual improvement. If we do the same things we've always done, that continual improvement will inevitably stagnate because life changes. Things need to improve. We need to be constantly looking for ways to either make more efficient or more innovative or more educationally sound practices within our centres and schools. Educational leaders have a huge role to play in guiding that change in a respectful, collaborative way. So I'm hopeful that for those of you that do go on to work in schools and centres and who do become educational leaders, that you do your due diligence in looking at effective change management processes and if you can, approach it with that sort of kind but determined relentlessness towards change. Okay, we're going to end today's lecture with a short quiz. There are 9 questions. They are each multiple choice. So before we begin, find a piece of paper or your OneNote or however you're going to take your notes. Just write down the numbers 1 through 9. And there will be obviously a letter, A, B, C or D for each of the responses. And it will be up to you to hit pause if you want to increase your thinking time. I will read the question and then I will move on to the next question. The answers will be shared at the end of the lecture. Okay, so pause now if you need to prepare your list 1 to 9. Okay, first question. Number 1. What is the primary role of the Australian Children's Education and Care Quality Authority, ACEQA? Is it A, licensing of early education programs, B, overseeing the application of the National Quality Standard across the country and ensuring services are meeting the requirements? Is it C, enforcing of state safety standards, or D, administering federal reimbursement programs? Record your answer for question 1 now. Question number 2. Research has found that all of the following characteristics are associated with quality early education programs except blank. A, new toys and colourful play equipment. B, small group size. C, teachers with training in early childhood education. Or D, low teacher to child ratios. Record your answer now. Question number 3. Ideally, play spaces for toddlers and older children should be A, combined so that older children can model appropriate behaviours. B, in close proximity so teachers can supervise both groups simultaneously. C, separated to reduce the incidence of injury and confrontation. Or D, scheduled for use by children on alternate days to reduce wear and tear on the equipment. Question 4. Children's play equipment and play areas should be inspected for hazards A, prior to each use by children, B, once a week, C, on a monthly schedule, or D, only when a teacher notices that something is wrong. Question 5. A safe choice of toys for a 2-year-old would include A, acrylic paints and paintbrushes, B, building blocks such as standard size Lego, C, marbles and pegboards, or D, none of the above. Question 6. Children's safety depends on A, careful adult supervision, B, teaching children safety rules, C, an awareness of children's developmental skills, or D, all of the above. Question 7. The term liability implies that carers or teachers A, have a moral responsibility to their colleagues, B, are legally bound to perform their duties according to professional standards, C, must answer to parents in the events of a childhood injury, or D, require additional training. Question 8. Licensed childcare programs A, simply complete safety checklists and submit them to local health authorities, B, are never inspected by local authorities, C, must meet and comply with national regulations and standards governing childcare settings, or D, are exempt from local fire, safety and zoning codes. And question 9. Adults can expect that once a rule has been established, children A, can be trusted to follow it consistently, B, will understand how adults expect them to behave, C, will continue to require careful supervision, or D, are able to follow the rule even under different circumstances. Okay, make sure you've got all your answers recorded. If you need to go back and click on a slide just to ensure you've put your guess, then please do so. The next slide will have the answers on there. Okay, so question 1 was, what is the primary role of the Australian Children's Education and Care Quality Authority? What's the primary role of a CEQA? The correct response is B, overseeing the application of the NQS across the country and ensuring services are meeting their requirements. Question 2 was, researchers found that all of the following characteristics are associated with quality early education programs except A, new toys and colourful play equipment. Question 3 was, ideally, play spaces for toddlers and older children should be, the answer is C, separated to reduce the incidence of injury and confrontation. Question 4. Children's play equipment and play areas should be inspected for hazards prior to each use by children. So that was response A being correct there. Question 5 said, a safe choice of toys for a 2-year-old would include, and the answer was none of the above. All of the ones were either had too smaller parts that were choking hazards or were inappropriate ingredients like acrylic paint, for example. Question 6 was, children's safety depends on, and all of the things that were mentioned in that answer were relevant, so the answer was D, all of the above. I'm confident you all got that one right. Question 7, the term liability implies that carers or teachers, B, are legally bound to perform their duties according to professional standards. We are not answerable to parents in that same way. We still have conversations with parents and describe things that have occurred, but we are legally bound to perform our duties according to the professional standards. Question 8 said, licensed childcare programs, the answer C, must meet and comply with national regulations and standards that govern childcare settings. And the final question, adults can expect that once a rule has been established, children, and of course the answer is C, will continue to require careful supervision. We cannot assume because we have told children a rule that they will perfectly implement that rule from then on. They are little people and they will forget or they will not completely understand, and we need to still supervise to ensure that we're monitoring their safety at all times. I hope you scored well.
Okay, so finally for today, just a little reminder on our presentation schedule. Well done to the presenters from last week. The dot points that you can see on the slide there about excursions, teamwork and communication, change management, and any assignment 3 support, I will fit those topics around presentation. So obviously in week 9, it might be a little bit tricky for us to fit it in because we're packed with presentations. However, it is my responsibility to make sure that those are covered in tutorials. So leave that section to me. I will certainly prioritize assignment 3 for you so that you feel well prepared. I do my best to try and get your presentation results to you in a timely manner. However, I do that sort of immediately after everybody has presented. So think at the conclusion of week 10. If you have any questions around that or any last minute queries about the presentation, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thanks for your time, everybody. That concludes lecture 9, and I will see you all at tutorial.